Well, hello there, and thank you for dropping in. My name's Craven, and I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about Pass the TOEIC Test, which is a course that I've written and published myself. And also, I'll be chatting with John later on about the writing process. I hope you find it of interest. So this is the course here. You see the highlighter, Pass the TOEIC Test, 3 levels. And if I click the slide, yep, that's me before I started teaching, when I still had hope. I started teaching in 1988, just to give you a bit of background. And these are the countries that I've worked in. Don't know if you recognize the flags. This is Italy, Portugal, Spain. This was Hong Kong before the handover, that is, so that was mid-90s. And then Japan, I was in Japan 1997 to 2000, and I've worked in the UK on and off during all of this period. In 1997, when I went to Japan, that's when I started writing. Found it very, very interesting. And then since 2000, when I left Japan, I've been writing full time. So these are the publications. This one here, Destination USA, that was my first book in Japan with Macmillan Language House. That's special because it's my first book. And then after that, there was Get Real, which was in East Asia. And then through Cambridge University Press, I started with Listening Extra, kind of resource book. Quizzes, questionnaires, and puzzles. And then it was Reading Keys, 3-level reading course for Asia. This is in the days when Macmillan had an Asia publishing division. And then also with Cambridge English Grammar and Use CD-ROM, not unfortunately the book itself, otherwise I'd be on a beach, but just the CD-ROM. And then the skill series, which I found very interesting with Cambridge, which is a kind of teach yourself English. You know, it can be used in the classroom, or you can buy them for self-study at home. Then in Japan with Seibido, World Interviews, that was a good one because it was completely up to me, just interviewing different people around the world about different topics. And then Breakthrough with Macmillan again, and then Messages, just 1 level, secondary course really for Cambridge. And the most recent thing, apart from Pass the TOEIC Test, with Oxford is Wide Angle down there, just 1 level, level 3. Typical case, that was American side, so I had to go to New York for that, American OUP publishing. And then just before they launched the course, they closed their American sales division. So that didn't help, but it's out there, it's been okay. So Pass the TOEIC Test then is something, like I said, that I did myself. I published it myself, my own company down here, First Press ELT. The idea behind First Press is actually wine, because I quite like wine. The first press is the freshest, the most original sort of thing. That was the idea. And then afterwards, I realized it sounds like #1 taxi company or something. So I got really embarrassed by it. But anyway, I've had to keep it. So Pass the TOEIC Test, got 3 levels, introductory, intermediate, and advanced. And the key questions are, what is it? And how is it better than the competition? So this is something, if you're writing your own materials, you have to be very clear about what exactly it is that you want to achieve, what's it doing, and in what ways is it better than other things that are out there. Those are the 2 starting points, I think. There is another starting point which underlies all of this, which is the students themselves. So for TOEIC, I didn't know much about TOEIC. I chose TOEIC because it was an exam. Exams don't fade. And it was a very specific exam for a very specific market. So I thought if I'm doing something myself, then it would be easier to find routes to market. TOEIC isn't something you can type by accident. That's why I chose it. I didn't know anything about the test. Actually, I don't like it that much, but anyway. The fundamental thing to start with are the student concerns. So I interviewed hundreds of students all over the place. Here in Cambridge, there are students all the time coming and going every month. So I was able to access, different schools and speak to loads of students, and you have to find out what they're struggling with. Whatever you're writing for, what do the students find most difficult? So for TOEIC, these were the things that they had. I have no time to think in the test. They're stuck like rabbits in headlights from the moment they begin. I only want to study the language I need for the test. Because it's an exam, then they're not interested in doing anything that isn't specifically related to the exam itself. They think they're wasting their time. Even if they're not, that's what they think. For TOEIC specifically, part 3 and part 4, the audio, they find they have trouble keeping up with the audio. So they're thinking about the answer from question 24, and in fact, 25 has already started. So that's a real struggle for many. And this is a big one. They want to know why answers are right and why answers are wrong. Not simply number 1 is B. That doesn't really tell them anything. They really want to know why it's B and why it's not A or C. Parts 5 and 6 are the hardest. This is what they were finding. With the grammar and the vocabulary, it's a huge area of concern. And part 7 always run out of time. There's loads of reading in part 7, and they're just, concerned that they haven't got enough time to actually finish the test. So after interviewing students about their fears about TOEIC, this is what I came up with, and that was the fundamental basis on which I started to devise the course. Thinking about the course, or anything that you're writing, you have to work out what are the advantages of what you're offering. How is it better than the competition? So with Pass the TOEIC Test, I think the first advantage I would point out is there's a clear emphasis on authentic skills practice. Now, all books claim to focus on, skills. The question is, how do you do it, and how clear is it? Is it simply a little tick box in the corner, or are you showing the skill in action, how to do it? Are you giving the students the skills they need to actually perform that skill, to use that skill effectively? So that's where I was coming from there. I looked at the test, and I found really there are the same skills for the listening and the reading. You've got main ideas, gist questions, you've got details, the specifics, and then you've got inferences. And no matter what the question, they could all be filtered down through these 3 skills. So, like I said, first of all, you have to explain the skill. What is it? And how does it work? How do I understand what this is as a student? How do I do it? And you explain that in stages. And then you have to practice it. Not simply, oh, now you practice, but practice it in steps. So instead of going straight into a full exam question, we've got 6 short conversations, each one with only 1 question in, that focuses purely on inferring meaning. So they'll listen to a conversation and they purely have to focus on inferring meaning. How do they do it? Well, you've already explained that. They can go back, they can see it in action here. So now they practice it. So you have to explain and practice the skill discreetly, not all in one go, but separately. Explain it first, practice a little bit, and then test. At the end of all of the skills input that we've done, we do have a mini test, which is a way of testing the student specifically on that skill, but in exam conditions. So it's a full length listening, but they're focusing only on the main ideas. So this, I think, is a very powerful tool when you're trying to, improve the skill performance of your students. When you're trying to explain what skills are, you explain it first, you show how it works, you then practice discreetly, and then finally you test. So explain, show, practice, and test, going through the skills for listening and reading. This is, I would say, the key advantage. The first thing I'd like to point out about Pass the TOEIC Test, what makes it different to the competition. The competition will practice, 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 but as we all know, practice does not make perfect. If you're doing something wrong or in the wrong way, you can do it 100 times and it will still be wrong or in the wrong way. You have to go to the fundamentals, you have to explain what the skill is, show how it works, and then practice it, and then test. So a lot of books just focus on the practice and the test. They don't really explain and show. I don't think there's any other book out there that does it in this way. Second advantage, test-taking strategies. So every exam, every test, for every type of question there are specific strategies that your students can use to help them. And I think this step-by-step bit is important. Again, it's not simply practice, practice, practice. It's learning how to input these strategies in a step-by-step, methodical way. So to show how that works, we've got this section called Steps to Success. This relates to part 7. We're explaining how to approach this part of the test. Well, first, quickly skim the passage and then look at the questions. That'll give you an idea. Then scan the passage to find the answers to the specific questions, refer to the answer choices. If you're not sure, eliminate the ones you're pretty sure are incorrect, and then make a guess. And then you just keep doing that each and every question you come to. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So you're giving students a step-by-step approach to tackling successfully each part of the test. So here, step 1, steps to success for part 1. Look at the photograph, gist questions, find specific items in the picture. What other things can you see? Listen to 4 statements and decide if you can eliminate them or maybe consider. And then step 4, choose your answer. And you don't just practice it once, you practice it 5 times. Each steps to success, as well as explaining what it is, gives practice, guided practice 5 times. And I think that's the way to do it when it comes to strategy. You don't just put a little tick box in the corner saying, hey, remember to focus on, details in the picture, exclamation mark. That doesn't help anybody. What you have to do is you have to show what to do. And this is for part 2. This is how the 4 steps to use. And you do that for each and every part. So the second advantage, I would say, to pass the TOEIC test, in addition to the skills treatment, is the way that it approaches the test-taking strategies. You explain what the strategy is, step by step, and how to do it. And then you practice that strategy step by step. And that way you build up confidence. This is a big thing when it comes to TOEIC or any exam, or indeed, any language learning situation for students. Building confidence. A lot of students start off with a degree of confidence and they have that knocked out of them by repeated failures. So how do you avoid having the students try something and then come out with a low score repeatedly, time and time again? Well, I think it's a case of, again, step by step building. So questions with how, thinking of part 2 here. Instead of going straight into a test, let's practice, here's a test. And, we don't do that. We allow them first to read. This is the question, read it. And these are the possible answers. Match. How much did the tickets cost? They were $50 each. Okay. So they're getting the idea with how questions, not by listening to start with, but just by matching up. And then next, you read the question and choose the correct response. So now they've got 3 possible options. And then down here, they read the questions, but this time they listen to the 3 possible responses and choose the correct one. And then finally, this is exactly as it is in the test. They hear 8 questions, they begin with how, they have 3 responses each, and they choose the correct one. So you're not simply starting with the test. You're building up how to do it, increasing their confidence as they go, leading them into it so that when they get here, they're more prepared. Step by step, the step-by-step approach develops a pattern of success. And at the end of the mini test, let's say they've got 6 or 7 correct, they'll feel good about themselves. But if you started off here on this page with the mini test, they might only get 3 or 4. So it's a question of leading them into success and showing them how to be successful on each part. Step by step again. I'm a big fan of step by step. Don't just throw students in the swimming pool and expect them to swim, you know. Do it step by step. The 4th advantage is grammar and vocabulary. All students worry about grammar and vocabulary. It's complete pain. They've got a point because they don't want to feel foolish if they're making grammar mistakes. And if they're listening to a conversation and there are words there they don't know, then how are they expected to know them? So grammar and vocabulary are important in language learning. We can't ignore it, especially in a test like TOEIC where it's specifically tested. So let's focus on grammar and vocabulary in a specific way. And the way is, first of all, let's take pronouns. Here are some example sentences. This is what's going on. Possessive adjectives, modify the noun. You explain it a little bit. I was quite influenced by English grammar in use here. I really like that style. Explain and then test. So at the same time as I was doing CD-ROM a bit later, I thought, okay, that's a nice thing. So we'll have left page is explaining the grammar. Here are these example sentences. This is what's going on. And the right page, you have true to the exam, test, practice. But it's pronouns. So all of these questions are focusing on pronouns. So first they study and then they test. So the target grammar is explained and then tested. And I went through the test, and these are the grammar areas that come up a lot. There's always something on relative clauses. There's always a subject-verb agreement. There's always modal verbs in there. And so approaching each one of those by explaining first and then testing is a nice way for students to feel that they're really boosting their grammar knowledge, and it's purely for the test itself. They don't want to be doing grammar that's not related to the test. They have to be convinced that all of these grammar points do come up on the test, which they do. Same for vocabulary. So word choice, in this case, collocation. Left page, give lots of examples of collocations. You can achieve success, achieve your goals, achieve an aim. Something is highly unlikely, extremely successful. There's no real way of, saying why is it, fully experienced and not greatly experienced. I mean, there's no particular logic way of explaining that. It's because that's the way it is. So collocations are a good example of having to learn. And so you give students lots of collocations and then you test. Explain and then test. Explain in this case just means showing which collocations work. Speak fluently, speak slowly, speak at length, write clearly, write and so on. Same way, boosting vocabulary. We've got all of these vocabulary areas that crop up repeatedly, phrasal verbs, conjunctions, words that look alike, similar meanings, and but we approach them in the same way. So explain, go, and then test. And then another advantage of Pass the TOEIC test is there are different accents in TOEIC. You know, there's English, Canadian, American, Craven, they're all native speaker accents. And some students are quite, you know, interested in identifying accents, but also quite worried that, oh, I can't really understand this accent or that accent. So what we're doing is focusing on accents and spoken English just a little bit to give them you know, a bit of confidence there. So Australian English, listen and read this conversation. So they hear a conversation, it's in Australian English. And they go, oh, okay, well, I know it's Australian, I'm listening to it. Okay, so this is what Australian English sounds like. And then they listen to individual sentences and try to focus on, oh, what are the missing words? Examples out head of marketing. They're pulling it out, focusing on the accent. And then finally, they're listening to sentences and they repeat what they hear. So they're just familiarizing themselves with different accents. It's a bit of fun, a few pages in the book, but it's nice for the students to do that. Also, spoken English, all sorts of things like, you know, linking the schwa, stress, rhythm, that type of thing. What makes English sound the way it does? When students say, oh, I can't understand, you know, the audio, they're speaking too fast. When you show them, well, actually, what native speakers do is they are combining words. So it's not did you know, but you know. Sorry, do you know? Do you know? Do you know what time it is? But not do you know what time it is? Do you know what time it is? So if you show students what happens during spoken English like this, then they go, oh, okay, well, I've got a bit of a clue what's going on. And then you practice it a little bit there. Thinking, can I take a look at that technically? So you show how things get compressed. So it's not necessarily that English speakers speak quickly. It's that they are linking words and sounds together in a particular way. And if you show students that, it takes a little bit of the fear out of it. Recognizing accents also, I think it's nice. I don't know why more books don't do it, but when you've got the audio script, why not say what the accent is? No harm. So here, this is a male British, and this is female Australian. So at home, students can go, okay, I'm going to listen to this again because this guy's British and she's Australian. So I'm just going to try and tune my ear into the different accents there. So for everything in Pass the TOEIC test, all of the audio, you say exactly what the accent is. So female American, male Canadian, female Canadian, male British. Why not? Some people really like that. And remember what I said earlier, the students that we were interviewing, they were saying, look, I don't know why my answer is wrong. You know, can somebody explain? That's where the teacher comes in, which is great. But if you're studying at home, or the teacher will have time in class, then you need to know why you're wrong and why you're right as well. So clear and detailed answer explanations, totally pain to write, but very important for the student. So here's an example, you know, question 2, the answer is B. Okay, why? Well, blah, blah, blah. And they ask you to go to the website and use the booking system. So you're highlighting the key words in the text. A confuses next week with the end of the week. B refers only to available dates and offer. The change is at 4 o'clock, and then we've not asked them to go back B at that time. So you explain things in detail so students can go through it afterwards in their own time, work out exactly where they went wrong and where they went right. Detailed explanations of why one answer is correct and why another is wrong. And really important to helping students, you know, feel more confident. So that's Pass the TOEIC test. Those are the strengths. Remember I said it's important to think about how what you're doing when you're writing something is going to be better in some way than other books that are out there. I would say to Pass the TOEIC test, it's a thorough skills development, explain, show, practice, test. The test-taking strategies, showing how to do the strategy, what they need to be thinking about, leading them carefully towards practicing that in the test itself. Confidence building exercises, don't simply give them loads of practice, explain how things work and build up step by step. Focusing on the grammar and the vocabulary, that's important. And the accents in spoken English, why not? A lot of the listening, students worry about so many things, including accents. Why does the language sound the way it does? And then detailed answer explanations, why this is right, why this is wrong. So I would say those are key differences with many other TOEIC books out there. And I don't think there's another TOEIC preparation course that encompasses all of those. So in terms of levels, we've got 3 levels: introductory, intermediate, and advanced. Introductory, the idea is that at the end of that book, you should be getting 500 or more, this kind of CFR range. Intermediate course, you want to be at the end of it, getting over 700. And for the advanced course, you want to be a good intermediate level when you begin, and you'd be hopeful of getting over 900 in the test when you finish. There's no hard and fast rule, there's no guarantees or anything, but it's nice to feel that instead of just one TOEIC book, that's the thing about an exam. You've got students of all different levels really taking the same exam, so you can't just do one book for them, because some will struggle and some will find it too easy. What you have to do is ease it out into at least 3 levels. We've got 3 levels here. And I think, assuming you've got the right student at the right level, they'll do very well using this course. The other thing's online support. So there's a website for plenty of free activities, and there's a couple of practice tests, and the students that buy the book, codes, registration codes, we'll give them a free online test. There's lots of information about viewing the course and the TOEIC test itself, study tips, teaching tips, teachers, and frequently asked questions, things like that. 2 videos to look at. This is an example of free activities, single sounding words, homophones, things like that. So teachers can, tell the students to do it online, or they can print off the worksheets, take them into class. This is an example of the test itself. This is a sample test. So very important that you have, if you're going to practice the exam, you need to practice it exactly the way you're going to be faced with in the exam room. So we're very, very careful to duplicate the test as accurately as possible. There's a sample test, which is free for everybody on the website, and that gives people an idea of, their score. It will translate their sample test into a TOEIC estimated score. And then, that's the free sample test there, and then there's a couple of tests here, full-length tests, 200 questions each. At the end of that test, which is timed, they're able to go back and review. They can see the audio script, and they can read the answer explanations, and they are told whether their answer is correct or not. So this is important. You don't just test and give the score, you have to test, and then they go through and they review. They can see everything, all the information on the page. This guy actually, his name is Bruce, a very nice guy at the Moore Centre in Churchill College, during the other week, 10 years ago. Bruce, still there. So, pass the TOEIC test. 3 levels. The thing I haven't said yet is that the levels have to be different. As students, level increases, the kind of things they have trouble with change. So in the introductory course, there's a lot of skills and a lot of strategies in there. There are skills and strategies in the intermediate course as well, but they're practiced in a different way. They're assuming a certain ability and they're pushing that ability further. They're also going into grammar and vocabulary detail a lot more. And then when you get to the advanced course, it's really about not making errors. So it's about speed in the test. It's about answering quickly. It's about motoring through the bits that they're confident with and about focusing on the bits they're less confident with. So timing is really practiced here. They're given specific timing to complete different sections. And that sort of forces them into a better time management in the exam itself. So that's Pass the TOEIC Test. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you a bit about it. The final slide here is, as it's always writing, about how it came into being. So, advisory board, that's a few people that I know in publishing or in teaching or TOEIC for some reason, just sounding things off them. That's very important. You can't do things all in your own head. You have to have other people bounce things off and to point you in the right direction. You need good editors. I used editors in the States. It's an American test after all. I'm not American, so and you've got to use the right people. I use people who are very familiar with TOEIC anyway, and so on. Authors, you need people to help you sometimes. Some of the online stuff, some of the stuff in the books as well, by authors, and you work with them as well to help create. Each book is about 380 odd pages. It's a huge amount of material. So yeah, other people helping is a great thing, especially when you've got deadlines. Then you need it designed properly so it doesn't look confusing on the page. Design is very, very important. How something looks on the page say a lot about how well students will cope with it. Then you've got to find somewhere to print it. We print ours in India mostly, and then ship to Asia, but the distributor in Taiwan, they print themselves. You have to find a distributor to sell the course, a good one. You can't do it yourself. It doesn't matter, how hard you try individually, depending on the type of book or the series of books that you've got, you need people to sell it. So, in Taiwan, for example, our distributor is Craven, and they have a large sales force going around Monday to Friday every week into universities, which is the target market for TOEIC. That's the TOEIC test. Showing the books and helping teachers, with any problems they've got, and giving them extra resources and support. And because of that, Pass the TOEIC Test does well in Taiwan. We don't really have distributors in France anymore, so hardly any sales in France. You need distributors. No point going through all this time, trouble, effort, money, and then sitting on it or having it on a shelf somewhere. If the purpose is to sell the course, then you need people to help you. With anything online, you've got to have people. I'm not a web type person, but you need people to do it. So, good local company, they devise the website and the test and all of that in the format. Local publishers are good partners because they might well take it on, but they might want to change it a bit for the local market. So try to work with local publishers. With Seibudo in Japan, they did a version of the introductory course. I didn't have a hand in, unfortunately, but anyway, it's what they thought was needed, so that's what they did. We've got to have somebody to keep an eye on the money, make sure not too much is going out at the same time. But so it's not just, you sat down, tapping away, in the evening, devising the course. There's a lot more to it than that. And I think the first question you need to ask as a materials writer is, what do you want to get out of it? Are you doing this for your students directly, so you can go into class on Monday morning and that's a lesson that you've devised and you've used it with your class, and you might use it again, you might not. Are you writing because you want to have a book published locally that's specific for that particular market? Is there a local publisher that you want to work with? Maybe you could approach them and say, look, I've got a really good idea that would go down well for students in this region or in this country because it works like this, like that. But if you've got bills to pay, mortgage, family and kids, then, and you want money out of it, then you have to be even more focused and say, look, I have to take a lot of time out of this. I've got to find somebody to sell it. I've got to find somewhere to print it. I might need help writing it in certain sections. I've got to find an editor. You can't just simply print what you write yourself. I need pointing in the right direction. I'm not good with money. I need somebody to tell me when, I spent too much. And something has to be online. If you can do it, fine, but you will need to find somebody to help you do that. And who's going to design it? All these things go into writing. So it really depends what you want to get out of it. Is it for you and your students? Is it for a book, some holiday money, or is it a major career change and you're going to turn down teaching in order to focus on the writing? What you want to get out of it yourself. So again, thank you very much. That's that. John, if you're out there, please let me know.
Hello, Miles. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Okay, do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yep. How am I going to do that?
I think I can do it for you.
Please.
Okay, now we're just I just have us side by side, and thank you very much.
Okay.
That was very informative, not only for the series Pass the TOEIC Test, but also at the end it was very nice for you to share your insights on the whole gamut of publishing in EFL. It's not like, as you said, it's not just sitting at the keyboard and writing. It's a whole other monster, I suppose. Yeah, so we'll do our interview for about half an hour or so, and I do have a list of questions, and the first one is, what inspired you to create this particular textbook? I know you touched a little bit about it. You said you didn't know anything about TOEIC, but you decided to write one on TOEIC. Can you elaborate a little bit on that decision?
Yeah, it was at the end of Breakthrough with Macmillan, and the writing part of that had pretty much finished. And I was thinking, what am I going to do next? And I fancied publishing something myself. And so I chose an exam because, exams don't die. If you were to do a listening and speaking book, after a few years, whatever the market is, people would want something different. The thing about choosing an exam is it goes on and on and on, and they do change the exam, which is why there was a new edition of Pass the TOEIC Test a few years ago. They did make some changes, and you have to adapt it to those new changes. But generally, the exam will be there all the time. So I thought it would be a longer running series than, listening, speaking, or grammar, vocabulary, that type of thing.
Yeah. When was the first Pass the TOEIC Test published? How many years ago?
I think it was about 2008.
Okay, and you made a new edition when?
About 2014, 15.
Okay. Yeah, well, I guess TOEIC is one of the largest tests. They get apparently millions of test takers every year.
Well, that's what I was thinking. But, I've since discovered that it's actually a really, really fragmented market. You don't have a single market where you can produce a book that will appeal to everybody. So there are millions of test takers, but there's a massive local publishing, industry just pushing out practice tests and pushing out bilingual short little practice books or preparation books. Not necessarily the best quality, but if it was me, for example, I'd want my own language. I'd want English in the instructions and the explanations. I wouldn't want something, in Japanese if I was taking Japanese, test or something. So the book that I decided on is a monolingual brick, which is, as I said, about 380 odd pages each. It's massive, and it's only in English. So that immediately forces this into a small corner of the TOEIC. So it's purely for private language schools and universities, mainly for native English teachers, but for some non-native English teachers, obviously only for those that are doing the TOEIC test. And yeah, unless you get that book into the staff room and you explain what the advantages are, you're not going to get it picked up, which is why you need a good distributor to do that for you.
Right. There are tons of TOEIC and books out there, and you see all new ones every year.
Yeah.
And it's hard to distinguish them, one from the other with just looking at the cover.
Yeah, that's right. And it often depends on, connections that are already established. So I also discovered the Japanese, publishing landscape is quite regional. You've got distributors in one part that do really well for certain universities, and distributors elsewhere that do well in their universities, and never the twain shall meet. And it's really, really fragmented. So
yeah, I think it's quite localized. I mean, you'll see, sales reps come to the universities. Sometimes it'll be the larger companies, Cambridge and Oxford, but often the local publishers will also come, and they'll have their list of books, and they'll try to talk to individual teachers, but they generally go to the larger universities.
Yeah, that's where the big adoptions are, really. I mean, the good thing is that you only need a few big adoptions, for whatever the book is that you've done. And they will run and run and run in a university system, because a teacher who's using it one year will then use the same book next year. So you're guaranteed several years. And in a university where there are a few hundred students perhaps using the book, then, it's a good financial starter to recouping what you spend.
Yeah, because sometimes you do get, the head of a department who particularly likes your book and kind of dictates the which book will be used by all of the teachers in that department.
You do, and you also get individual teachers, mainly perhaps Japanese teachers, who write their own book and use that book with their own English class, no matter what the supposed focus is.
That does happen, yes.
But that's the model for most of the local Japanese publishers, because
right.
2,000 copies, and that's what they work on. But the bigger publishers need more than that, so to recoup what they've spent. So that's why they go international. So it's not specifically for Japan. London, for example, their TOEIC book is not versions, I don't think, for individual markets, but they might do a bilingual version. I really wanted to do a bilingual version of Pass the TOEIC Test, because I think it'd be much more, approachable. But it's still a brick.
So if you were to do it again, for let's say the Japanese market, would you work with one of the local companies and try to get a translator to do the translations?
Yeah, I think you have to. You have to start really at the end. So you have to start by thinking, who's going to sell this? And then you work back from there. So you choose a publisher, for example, Sabilo and Nanando or Kinseido or whatever, and you go to them and you say, I've got all this English, material for this type of book, or I've got all this practice material for this type of test. They will have their own set of criteria, how many pages, how it should look. They'll have their own people to do the translation. They'll have their own designers. And they'll tell you if it fits into their publishing plan or not. They might have 5 books that are very similar coming out in the next few years, in which case you'd be wasting your time. So it's important to contact the publisher first and to find out what their needs are and what their parameters are and whether what you're offering matches their publishing plan.
Yeah, and do you know if they have 2 models of publication, whether it's the author puts the money up front for printing and publication, or does the company invest in, take a risk and invest in the author and pay for the printing costs, for example?
Yeah, well, in my experience, it's always been, the publisher's responsibility to pay for publishing the course. I don't know how things are now, though. And I think there's a very blurred line that's appeared between, who pays for what. Publishers are under incredible strain because there's so many books out there. It's a bit like Netflix. I went on Netflix last night trying to find something to watch. Spent half an hour. Everything says it's fantastic. Chose 2 things. They were rubbish. And English language textbooks are a lot like that. So whatever the market is, there's so much out there. You just never know whether it's any good or not. So the publishers are fighting for survival in many cases, and if they're turning around to authors and saying you have to pay X amount towards it, then I kind of wouldn't be surprised, but I wouldn't do it. In the UK and international publishing, it's changed a little bit in that direction. They're not asking for a contribution from the authors, but they are reducing royalties, and they are actually saying, we won't pay you a royalty, we'll pay you a fee. So sometimes I do get contacted saying, are you interested in this or that? I go, oh, what's the royalty? Oh, no, we're paying a fee.
Right.
In which case, no, because, you'd be better off flipping burgers at McDonald's by the time you finished. So publishers are always trying to scrape back money from authors. They need authors to contribute what they can't do themselves and to come up with some, passion and interest in what they're doing and some unique angles and some level of expertise. They need authors, but they don't want to pay authors anything.
Right. I think people are getting squeezed from all different directions, and particularly in the Japanese market, especially the university market, it's shrinking because the demographics are just they're not there anymore, and every year there are less and less university students, and it's a lot easier these days to self-publish because of computer technology, and people can do a lot of things on their own. But that means more competition, but less a smaller market.
The thing is, you can self-publish a fantastic book that nobody will ever hear of it unless you've got distributors, agents working to get it out there to the right people.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said is you could have a wonderful product, a wonderful textbook, and if nobody knows about it, it's just a shame that people don't know about it, and it's hard to get the word out. So I'm very glad that you're doing this tonight, and that we can hopefully promote your book a little bit because it seems like a fantastic book and a great way for students to improve their TOEIC scores. And a lot of students do. Maybe they're not willingly, but they do have to take the TOEIC test. And in Japan especially, scores are generally lower than in other countries. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it's motivation. It's probably a large factor. But your step-by-step approach seems to be quite, it seems to make sense. It would help a lot of students. And it's better than just doing practice test after practice test after practice test without any improvement.
Well, that's right. It's very hard for students to gauge any level of improvement if all they're doing is practicing, tests and coming out with they've got, a 650 score on one test and they got a 570 score on another, and then they take it again and they get 430. It's hugely demotivating, and they're just sort of swimming in circles. So that was the main thing that Pass the TOEIC Test was trying to, help with students and teachers, because teachers are there in the classroom. Students are sort of tapping their fingers on the desk saying, we want to practice. But practice, like I said, doesn't make perfect. And then they're saying to the teacher, you have to teach me how to do well on TOEIC. Teach me how to get a better score. And that's a tough ask. I mean, this took 3 years, a lot of research and hard work in coming up with a kind of format that allowed teachers in the classroom to actually teach in terms of the strategies and skills.
Right.
But still had a lot of practice that the students can go off and do at home. But then on the marketing side, you end up with a brick, monolingual brick, which is way too big for many classrooms. Typical classrooms with 15, 16 lessons. They're not going to get through a third of that material, even a quarter, and that puts people off. But what do you do then? Do you fragment it into bite-sized chunk, which doesn't really, help anyone, but it's easier to fit into a semester? Or do you do a bilingual version and hope that's going to appeal? There's all sorts of questions all the time on what makes something work and what doesn't.
Right. Well, what about splitting the test into like the speaking and the listening? It's split down into different sections.
Yeah, again, but if you've got a TOEIC class, you can't spend your whole year just on the listening section, because 50% of it is reading. So there has to be a kind of spread. But if you're limited to 150 odd pages, a small, A5-ish almost format, then there's only so much material you can get on there. So all of these constraints really do impact. I'm interested that Longman, who have something similar, another brick, haven't done a kind of split edition or a local edition or anything like that. They're just stuck with what they've got.
A lot of TOEIC books are bricks. They're tremendous. They're huge, and it's impossible to get through them all. And a lot of the teachers who teach those classes, it's kind of like an odd class. Like out of the weekly, schedule that they have, they might have one TOEIC class.
Yeah, a nightmare.
And and it's not the most interesting topic as opposed to like intercultural studies or something like that. That might be much more interesting for the teacher and also the students. So that kind of leads me to my question: how does the material help motivate students to improve their scores, and also how does it motivate teachers to teach that content?
Yeah, that's a good one, because TOEIC, can easily become a very a depressing space in the classroom. I think the motivation, when you can't talk about interesting topics and students aren't sharing information about themselves, there isn't any of that in TOEIC, and the TOEIC class shouldn't actually include it because it's off the message. But the confidence and the motivation comes from success, and that's why you've got 3 levels. If it was just 1 level, many students, especially in Japan, would really struggle with it, and they try to, complete the exercise, and they'd come out with a low score, and then they'd try another test, and that would be low. That's where your motivation and your confidence disappear, and that's what sounds the death knell for a TOEIC class. That's why Pass the TOEIC Test, we've got 3 levels, so hopefully there's a level for everyone, and it's all about the strategies and the skills and introducing those step by step. If you introduce things step by step and you show students how to succeed, then they will succeed, and then their motivation and confidence grows. So that's what you can do with an exam course. You can foster a culture of success rather than repeated failure, like hitting your head against a brick wall.
Right. Okay, can I switch gears a little bit here? Why did you decide to publish this textbook independently? Because you've got like over 30 textbooks with big companies, Cambridge, Macmillan, but this one is independently published. I was curious why you decided to do that.
Well, yeah, there are lots of constraints when you work with another publisher, and there are lots of compromises that have to be made. There are good activities that you think work really well, and the publisher will just strike through and say, we haven't got space for that, or no, that doesn't belong here. A lot depends on the editor, a lot depends on their own publishing program. Oh, this is, you can't do that, you can't say that, we can't have that. So in terms of writing what you want to write, then self-publishing is perfect. So there are no compromises with Pass the TOEIC Test. I didn't have to take anything out that I thought would be better left in. So you have a lot more control, which is great. And the other thing was financially, publishers, Oxford, Macmillan, Cambridge. I didn't fully understand the amount of work and how hard it is for publishers to get books out there in order to be successful and to keep the plate spinning. It is a huge industry. So I didn't appreciate that. So I was thinking Oxford are only paying 8%, of net. And they've sold X 100,000 or whatever. And if I only had 10% of those sales, I would be much better off financially. So I was thinking that it would be a better financial investment for me to publish and take on that cost on the basis that, I wasn't getting a tiny percentage of what came back.
Right.
But I totally underestimated the difficulty of publishing. Getting it out was one thing. That was a huge struggle. Just producing the books, publishing the books, but then having the right people sell them in the right market to the right audience, that's really tough.
Right. The distribution and marketing is a completely different, I guess, way of working. I mean, in terms of when you're writing the book, you're doing something creative, you're doing something academic, you're doing something logical, but the selling part is completely different, and you need good people to do that, to help you do that.
You can't do it yourself. Like, you need to find the right people in the right place. So like I said, in Taiwan, we're very lucky to have Craven. If anyone is thinking about publishing something outside Japan there, I would recommend going to Craven with it. They are a really good, strong, dynamic distributor. And of course, they want their cut, but in return, they really do get the books out, which is fantastic. But without somebody like that, it's tough. We tried in Korea with a few different people, and they sold a few here and a few there. But, only a few hundred here, a few hundred there, which was great. But then they've got so many other courses that they're also promoting. TOEIC is a very restricted, corner of the market, really, anyway. And then, as I said, this book being monolingual and a brick puts it into an even smaller space.
So how did this? You're talking about how successful it has been in Taiwan. Are they selling to, I guess, what they call native English teachers at the universities there directly?
Yeah, I think most of it goes to native English teachers. The kind of teacher who gets told you're doing the TOEIC next year, and there's a big sigh. And this is the book that they will go for. Also, non-native teachers who are more sort of international, if you like, more open to this type of thing. The reason why it's 380 odd pages each book is because, again, when I was doing the background, all the research and focus groups, two things that TOEIC students want. Number one is actually quantity. They want lots and lots and lots and lots of material. And number two is quality. So I tried to do both. I tried to do quantity and quality, tick both of those boxes. And yeah, originally I thought that was it, job done. But it doesn't squeeze itself into every corner of the market as easily as I thought.
Right. Is the book fairly expensive compared to other books, because it is such a large book, or is it?
Yeah, it's deliberately priced lower than Macmillan, for example, lower than the competition by some way. Even though I would say quality-wise, it's just as good, if not better, because I wrote it. But I think there are advantages there over the Longman one or Barron's. So it's deliberately priced lower. So it should be hitting the right point. It should be going up. Anybody who's using Barron's or Longman,
Right.
the Sengage's one, Pass the TOEIC Test should be right there. And it's a bit cheaper as well. And it does this differently. And I like the way it does that, and so on. That was the thinking,
Okay, getting back to the actual writing of the book, you said you had other authors help you because it is, three massive bricks, right, to write this thing. So how? I guess you had a lot of connections already with your, decades of teaching. How many people did actually help you write the content of the books?
Well, I put kind of the word out, and I asked for sample material, and about 30 odd authors responded to this sort of mini test that I'd set, and I chose 4, brought them together for the weekend here in Cambridge, talked through the elements of each part, gave them as much help and support as possible, put them in touch directly with the editors in the States, told them to go off. Basically, they were going to write the online material. The original plan was to have about 12 online tests. Originally, I thought that it was the online tests that were going to make more money than the actual books themselves, thinking that everything's online these days.
Right.
Charge a few hundred yen for a test. That was the idea. So they went off, and then the material came back, and surprisingly, wasn't as good as I thought. Not because these authors were not good authors, because they are, but because they just didn't fit the TOEIC. My head had been in TOEIC for years at this point, and I knew how sentences were put together. I knew how questions were formulated. There's a particular sort of structure that it needs to go into in order to be authentic. But sometimes that wasn't the case. So a lot of that material had to be pulled. Authors were still paid, so a lot left. There were some that were really good, and I was running out of time, so I'd done introductory, I'd done pretty much intermediate, but instead of putting them online, a couple of those tests I think went into intermediate and advanced as well into the books, at the end.
Right.
So I had to use some of the material in the books, although that wasn't originally the idea. And it wasn't as simple as saying, this is how to do it, now go away and do it, even with specialist editors involved. This is always part of the learning process when you're publishing yourself, because that is a huge headache that as an author, you wouldn't be aware of. It's the publisher that would be panicking about that,
Right.
2 days before the recording and having to rewrite, 30% of the material. That's a publisher's responsibility. So, yeah, I can see where publishers, earn their money, both in the process of producing the book, getting it out, and in promoting it.
Right. And I imagine you have the audio component as well. Did you organize that, or did you hire an outside company to do the audio components?
Well, yeah, all the audio is professionally done. So I had it done by James Marshall Media in New York, another studio in New York, and then there was a studio here just outside Cambridge. They get professional voice actors, native speakers. So this person, actually Canadian, actually American, not pretending to put on the voice, and also professional voice actors. So able to deliver lines authentically. There's a huge difference between doing something yourself, audio-wise, with your friends or whatever, no matter what the accent, and having it professionally recorded and done by audio professionals. So I spent a lot of money on the audio because I wanted it to be as good as it,
Right. If you do have bad audio, it's obvious that it's bad.
It is. And it goes back to what you expect to get out of the book. If you're looking for some holiday money because, a few copies have sold and that will cover your vacation, that's one thing. But if you're spending a lot and you need more back, then you have to do things properly. You can't cut corners. Bad audio is really bad. And it's like the design. If the design doesn't make any sense or it's all over the place, again, you've been let down twice over. So there are so many pitfalls. Yeah, I just wanted to do it right. So it cost a fortune.
Yeah. So did you give them like a sample recording of your own voice of how you kind of wanted it to, like a particular section, or did you just give them a script?
Well, the audio, the studio, they would take the material and then they would divide it up into different voice actors, and then they would schedule it, and then they would come together, and it would work very, very smoothly. So the studio had a lot of setting up to do in terms of making the most out of each actor.
Right.
And I was there as well, so I would be there for the entire recording, in the studio listening. And if something didn't sound right, I would say that's not right. But you'd be surprised how great the professional, voice actors are. They are really good. And I didn't really have to intervene many times at all. Really good, professionals. It's very different. The way they say something, they would rehearse and practice, and then they do it. Often, one take was enough, and it was perfect. So yeah, nice working with professionals like that.
Yeah, great. So we've got a few more minutes here. Can you tell me a little? You've written so many books. What is your creative process like? Do you have everything organized and mapped out well in advance, or is it kind of messy and you just kind of work your way through it, or what's the process? Because I imagine it is creative in some ways. It's not all pure academic, well, I'll let you explain your creative process.
Yeah, I mean, TOEIC is unusual because it's for an exam, a pretty dry exam with limited number of sort of business scenarios, and there's no real engagement beyond that. But all of the other books, once you've got your format, how many units, what topics are, what skills you want to introduce, then you work out what grammar is needed, and then what vocabulary is needed. So when you open a typical like 4 skills book, and you get the scope and sequence, and it will give you all the units and the topics and what's covered. You do that first. And then what you have to do is you go to each unit, and it's as if you're reading the scope and sequence. I've got to include the passive here, and I need to practice this skill, and I need this vocabulary. And then the hard part begins, because everything up to that is really good fun, about sketching out how we're going to do this and how it's going to be different, and let's have this feature and that feature. Once you've got that nailed down, which it has to be, and you go through unit by unit by unit, it's an absolute nightmare trying to get that language, those skills, those strategies, into the topic in an engaging way. You're faced with all sorts of constraints, like, oh, we can't have it listening here because that's not in the right place. So this will have to be a reading. But if it's a reading, it's going to be too long. So you have to take out this and take out that. And, what visuals are you going to have there? And yeah, so it's a nightmare. So I enjoy the planning and the preparation, but when you sit down and you're sort of thinking, Monday morning, I've got, 1 unit to do this week, and then you arrive on Friday and you're halfway through, that's the tough bit.
Right. So I imagine you do have a schedule or kind of a framework of where you need to be in a project.
Yeah, it's deadline driven at that point, which is a real stress. It takes all the fun out of writing, all the fun.
So do you ever get to a point where it's like, well, the deadline's coming up and this will have to do?
No, I would miss the deadline rather than submit something. I mean, one thing I'm reasonably good at is a very good first draft that doesn't need to be totally rethought. So, if they have to wait a bit longer for that, then so be it. But the publishers really don't like it. So ideally, you wouldn't be missing deadlines. But I always remember a Roald Dahl quote. He said that I really like deadlines. I love the noise they make as they whoosh by. So I always think of that. But you can't miss deadlines because so much depends upon that material. The editors have to have it. They have a deadline to go through it. Then it has to be passed on to, design. and so on. So everyone was kind of waiting for the material.
Right. It's kind of like this pipeline where if
Yeah.
one aspect of that gets stopped, everything comes to a halt, and as the writer, you're one of the first ones in that pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. And then because of that delay, those people down the line who have had to do something else. And when they get your material, they're already contracted to do something else. So, it has huge repercussions if you do miss deadlines.
Right. Okay, so you've written 3 books with your company, First Press ELT. Are you planning to write any more independently, or what's on the horizon for your next book?
Well, the plan was to go through the exams. So the plan was pass the TOEIC test, pass the TOEFL test, pass the IELTS test, use that same format of focusing on the skills and the strategies, which I think works well no matter what the test. But that didn't come to pass, unfortunately. My wife became very ill, and I didn't have the time to push that. And now I think that ship has sailed, really. So I'm not going to be, writing anything along this lines. I would be reluctant to self-publish unless there was a distributor or a local publisher who came along and said, we want you to do this, in which case I would look at it very carefully and see whether I wanted to do it. But yeah, the original plan of doing a suite of exams was too ambitious, I think, and didn't rely on life getting in the way.
Yeah, sure. So you've written over 30 books, is that correct?
I suppose all told, yeah, but if you put like series in, like Breakthrough, that's 5 books.
Yeah, but you were also a university teacher, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you come to the point where were you a full-time teacher, part-time teacher, or?
I started in Japan in '97 full-time with Nichidai and Mishima. And before I arrived, I was quite nervous about it. And then when I arrived, I realized I only had 13.5 hours per week, and that was considered full-time. So I thought, God, what am I going to do with the rest of the time? So I got a couple of part-time jobs. I got an evening job. And then I got interested in writing, because I think Japan's like really interesting in the classroom. What works, what doesn't work. Things I started by thinking, oh, these are university students, I need to go in with these international textbooks. Totally dive bomb. Really hard work. And it's because of that you get interested in, why didn't this work? And, how could it work better? And why does the same thing work well with one class but not another? You're never bored, I don't think, as a teacher or materials writer, because there's always questions to answer.
So what was there some point where you decided, I'm going to stop teaching and I'll devote my working days to writing textbooks full time? Because that's what you do now, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was probably at the end of my 3-year contract at Nichidai. Question was, would I try and get another job in university, keep writing part-time? I'd just finished Get Real for Macmillan at that point. There was a bit left to do, but not much. I couldn't find a job to keep me there, and my mother was ill here in the UK, so I thought I'll go back to the UK. So I carried on finishing off Get Real, and then I got, Cambridge came up with the listening extra, and then Macmillan came back with reading keys. So I quickly found that I was working, full time as a writer anyway.
Okay, so that worked out very well for you, I suppose.
I think the transition was good, and that's the thing about royalties when you're writing. If I'd been writing for a fee, I wouldn't have been able to turn down work after coming to the UK. Right. I would have had to carry on working, teaching, even part-time, but that takes a big chunk of your time out of your writing day. So I think it's very tough to both teach and write. I decided I'm going to focus on writing for a few years and see how it goes, which I enjoyed. But I was only able to do that because of, the royalty system. I knew that money would be coming in to pay the bill.
Right. And the books that you do collect royalties on, do they have would you say like a shelf life, like before they stop selling a certain amount, like 5 years or 10 years before they, discontinue publishing those books, or the sales go down so low that it doesn't really amount to much?
Yeah, I mean, typically a publishing, profile for a course would be a big upswing at the start, and then you hope for a long plateau, and then you get a final slow decline at the end. A bit like cars, you can't have the same Toyota Corolla, for 10 years. You'd be looking at doing a new edition at least after 5 years. So something like Get Real, it still sells in Japan, surprisingly, 20 plus years on.
Really?
Not in the same numbers, no. So that was a classic case of going up quickly and then staying quite high and then gradual tail off. Breakthrough, also still doing okay. In fact, there was a second edition and then a new edition. And I did a version for a university in Mexico, which would count, because it was extensive, as a new edition if they wanted to publish it again internationally. But that's a frustration. Macmillan don't seem that keen on that, because that's the other side of your question, is there's fatigue. You can only use the same course as a teacher for so long before you're looking around for something else, no matter how good it is.
Right, either that or
yeah.
Yeah, either that or the courses you teach don't match the book anymore, because yeah. Just one last question about royalties. You said, things are changing in the publishing industry over the several past few decades. What is a typical, like if there's a new writer and they want to write a book and they're negotiating with royalty rate, what do you think would be a typical royalty rate? And that would be based on, I guess, net profits of the sales?
Well, the royalty is normally based on, net profit. But unfortunately, I think the publishing landscape is so different now that it's not a case. Like for reading keys, Macmillan came to me and said, "Oh, we're looking for a reading course for, East Asia. Come up with some ideas." That's not really happening anymore because the publishers are so squeezed by all of the online, burden, and then all of the local publishing that's far easier now, far more numerous, competition they have to face. They're not really, it's too much of a risk. So what they're doing, a bit like car manufacturers again, they're saying, we have this, either, they've got their skills, they've got their grammar and vocabulary, they've got their portfolio, and they're saying, in 3 to 4 years, we're going to need a new young adult 4 skills course. They're not going to writers to say, what are your ideas? Basically, they're filling in all of the necessary features that it has to have themselves. And then they're going to writers to say, we want you to do this bit, and this bit, and they're not going to one writer, they're going to several. You'll often see 3, 4, 5, 6 names on the cover, because they're going to a bank of writers, which reduces their risk. So if one writer becomes ill, the whole project doesn't stop, they can get somebody else in. And they're also paying a fee. They're offering a fee rather than a royalty more often than not. Because again, if they do version for one market, or if they decide to package it with another product, they're forever having to go back to the author to renegotiate their contract. If they just pay a fee, that material is theirs, in perpetuity forever. So they can do what they like with it. So it's not, I don't think my job really exists anymore, as an author. I don't think publishers respect authors in the way that they used to. They don't seem to feel the need that they have to have.
They don't seem to value them.
No, they don't. All you are is a content provider.
Right. All right, Miles, I think we're going to have to leave it here. Thank you so much for doing this. It was very enlightening, and I'm sure all of the members of our SIG will appreciate watching this video. And hopefully you'll have some more sales in Japan. I'll try to promote it at the next JOUT event through our SIG. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, John. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.